Welcome to the Inventory Professional Podcast, brought to you by InventoryBase, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports. Join us as we discuss the latest news, legislation, and all things property, hosted by our very own inventory expert, Sián Metcalf. With regular special guests, listen in to our open and honest discussions about the role of the inventory professional and how to navigate through this ever-changing, fast-paced industry.
So welcome to the Inventory Professional, and today's podcast, we've got guest speakers, guest podcasters with us, both Tim Hill and Philip Carter, both from Keyzapp. Hi guys, thank you very much indeed for coming on our podcast.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to be talking about keys because they are absolute pain in the proverbial. I promised I wouldn't swear and I'm not going to. They are a real pain, and I don't think it's just for me, it's for contractors across the industry, the supplier industry, etc. So just quick bit background for everybody that's listening. Phil and I'm not sure if Tim, if we met before at the conferences. I think we have, haven't we?
I think we did, yeah.
I know I always make a beeline for Phil because he's always got really good stuff on the stand. There's always something that I can have off the, as a gift, etc. And we always have a good laugh, don't we, Phil?
He's better looking as well, isn't he, really?
That's I'm not going to have that conversation. But it's always a pleasure to kind of like meet up with both of you. And that's kind of like where we met. And that's kind of like where, we started talking about keys. And I know certainly now keys are a real big issue in the industry, certainly from my point of view. Before we get any further in, would one of you like to explain exactly what Keyzapp is about?
Yeah, sure. So Keyzapp is a really simple way to keep track of keys that's proven to work. So it sort of breaks down into three things very quickly. So firstly, the thing that possibly draws people to our stands, for example, at exhibitions, is the fact that we have some... Apart from the merchandise, is the sort of contactless tech that we have. So the idea is you have like a little contactless tag that clips onto every set of keys, and it works just like a contactless credit card. So you touch it against a reading device like a mobile phone or a little thing that you can plug into your computer very easily. And by doing that, you can get all the information about a set of keys very quickly. You just touch it, you see what's going on. And we use that to sign keys in and out. So you sort of zap the key one after the other very quickly, for example, and you can issue loads of keys really quickly and capture all the information.
And
then what it does...
like a track and trace then for keys.
Yeah, exactly. Track and trace for keys, if you like. Yeah. Then what it does, obviously, once you've got all that information, you just need to be able to access it really quickly. So you can ask it questions like, who has the keys to a particular property, or what keys has Sián got right now, for example, and any agent could see straight away that Sián's got 10 keys because she's going to do inventories for 10 properties, or that sort of thing. And the thing that people really like then is the kind of alerting and reminder mechanism, which actually helps you chase those keys back to the office as well. So, it's very easy for people to forget to track a key back in or to leave it in the car or something like that. And so actually to have reminders saying that key's not been signed back in again is really useful, because as we all know, the safest place for a key is in the cabinet back in the office.
Yeah, definitely in the cabinet, not in my pocket, not in my car, not in one of my clerks' pockets or cars, etc., etc. So, okay, so we've got this technology, and at the moment, we are in a prop tech boom, I would argue, especially since the pandemic has started. I think we're being even more innovative. I think, one, because we've got a little bit more time, we can concentrate on projects and trying to get around all these particular issues, but keys still remain a pain, certainly from my point of view as a supplier to the lettings industry. But I know, talking to surveyors, to other contractors in the wider supply industry, that they are still difficult. How can technology manage these issues, especially because of what we're experiencing as clerks? How can technology help with that?
Well, for me, the beautiful thing about tech, or prop tech, if you want to call it that, is it can make processes as simple as they can possibly be and standardize it. I think there's no one way to manage keys effectively. Some people will do it through their CRM, some people do it a keybook way, some people rely on just their memory, and even their coding processes that they have on each tag can be varied as well. Some it might just be the key hook number. I've seen some that have the full address on there. I don't know why. Complete security is straight off.
Is it? I mean, if we lose the keys and it's got the full address, then we're just you're basically literally opening the door to someone to that property, aren't you? So that's what I can't ever understand also from an agency point of view. I know I've seen where some agents are still using that old school book type, that lined paper. Do you remember that we used to get to write on to practice our writing? They're still using that as a method. Why is that?
I think it's because a lot of companies will say, we've always done it like that, and just appreciate the way that it was done for many, many years and don't see a problem with it. But the truth is, it's always been flawed and it's always been broken, but they don't see the issues. They'll always put the blame onto somebody else, or put it onto the clerk or the contractor, and the contractor will say, no, it's the agency's fault. And so it's that responsibility of who is to blame. And if you get over the fact of, look, we're all kind of in this together, surely there is a better way, that's when companies really start to look at innovative ways to manage these processes.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I know a lot of the time I will have these kind of conversations with some agents, not say mine particular own in regards to my own particular business, but certainly in conferences. And yeah, I do get that conversation where we've always done that, and it's a real pain to move over to something else. And even though sometimes they realize that actually that would be a much better way, not just for them as a business, but equally for everybody involved in that chain of working, whether it be estate agents, letting agents, or actually, as we were talking a bit earlier on before we started, the build to rent market, where we're going to be seeing a lot more flats and block management, where the size of that safe is going to be massive, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, keys are a pain in so many different places. And I mean, they are particularly a pain if you're the person that has to pick a key up and then go and use it. I love talking to inventory clerks because they get the problem straight away.
That's because we're normally at the end of the problem, because if you think of the kind of like the timeline, 9 times out of 10 we either are or should be the last people to have the keys. But then that always kind of puts us in a bit of a position, because quite often we're the first ones to get blamed when keys kind of like go missing, even though we can say, well, we gave them back, and we even give a name as to who we gave them back to. But if they don't log them in, or if they put them in their desk, which I sometimes see, you open the desk, oh, that'll go in there, I'll remember that later, and all of a sudden they've gone missing, and then I get an email or a frantic phone call, where are your keys? When did you give them back? Who did you give them back to? At what time did you do it? And can I have it to the second? Because we can't find them. And I'm like, it's a pain.
Absolutely. And you're all kind of losing time, aren't you, when that happens as well? So you're there sitting there waiting. The agents, I mean, I was in an office the other day, and I think I saw 4 or 5 people interrupted to try and work out where a particular set of keys had gone. There was actually a landlord in the office there as well, who actually wasn't asking for those keys, but they were just watching the problem. And I was thinking, well, what confidence is that, for example, giving to that potential customer as well? It's one of those things. It's a small thing in some ways, but it has quite a big knock-on effect, doesn't it, across the way we all work together across the industry?
Yeah, hugely so, especially from the time element, because a lot of reports, certainly nowadays, because agents aren't doing the check-ins, they're attempting to do the reports on the same day as the tenant is meant to be moving in, because that way then they'll use our services to check that the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms are working, that the keys are there, and so that basically they can just move the tenant in. But the trouble is then, if those keys are either missing or they're with another contractor and they can't find that contractor, which is a constant issue, and where they've given them out and one person can't remember who got them, and then that's that frantic, like you said, ringing around, who's got them. And I had one the other day, I'm in Portsmouth, the keys were in Winchester, and I'm stood there waiting for the job to start. Tenants are wanting to move in, and I've got no keys and I can't do anything. And it's that track and trace element that I think certainly technology can help with, and I'm presuming that's what your system Keyzapp does.
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy, actually. We're, in fact, our little contactless tags have a QR code on them, very similar to the track and trace QR codes that we're all getting used to scanning at the moment as we go in and out of places. What it does is it just makes that identification of a key really easy as well. So if you touch a key to your device, and you could do this, for example, as an inventory clerk, you can touch that and you can just check, for example, have I got the right key here? Things like that, you can get access really quickly, and it makes the capture of information, which we all really need to do. We've all got requirements to make sure we can prove somebody's keys are really important. We can prove when we gave them out and things like that. But it's really arduous if you've got to sit and write that down or type it into a spreadsheet, and take a long time to do. So like you say, just that scanning of a QR code or touching it to a device and have all of that captured instantly, makes a huge difference. And of course, when we make that process so easy, it makes the ability of people to actually follow it properly so much better as well. So you get much better compliance as a result, because all the problems that you previously had are kind of gone away.
Well, yeah, especially where the compliance and evidence side of it definitely comes into play. I mean, because if you think about it, it's not just about getting the keys to do a report, do a survey, do an EPC, do an EICR, do a gas safety. It's also then what happens to those keys when the tenant gets them. I mean, should they be then tracked and noted for that point of view? Because obviously you've got your management set. So effectively you've got two sets, haven't you? Management set and a set the tenants get. And then be able to maybe track the fact that tenants have got them. And then also when you get them back, because certainly from an inventory provider point of view, when we get those keys back, we don't necessarily know what was given out in the first place. So if we had an ability to see how many, what type, when, also equally, if they've been extra sets have been ordered by a tenant, sometimes that happens, and they're meant to give them all back, but we wouldn't necessarily know. Now I know certainly without, if a tenant wants to get them recut, there's no way realistically of knowing that. But then I suppose if you had them on a tag and had it so that they could maybe taken off those tags, and each set was given a specific tag, and they were almost a bit like a bike lock, they couldn't be taken off, so you have to keep that tag on. You could then maybe tell, perhaps, I don't know, going forward, whether those keys had actually been recut, so we'd have an understanding. And certainly when it comes to checkout, then we know what to expect, or the agent knows what to expect to come back. So it's about that whole life journey, isn't it, really, not just from supplier contractor point of view, but also through the tenancy as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, you can get things like tamper-proof key rings and things, as you say, where you'll be able to see that complete life cycle or life journey and everything that happens. And as you say, quite often the set of keys that you hand out will not be the set of keys you get back, or you've given them 2 sets and 5 sets have suddenly come back, and even handing them over to the agent, they're a bit like, what the hell's going on here? And so even like fixing that problem of going, we now have 5 sets, can be a task in itself. But quite often they'll just put all 5 sets back up on the hook, and then that's where cracks start to appear. All that needs accounting for.
I think most agents would be really happy if it was that way round, and they gave out 2 sets and they got 5 sets back. I think it's normally the other way round. And like you say, actually being able to record properly, like what's on a set of keys when you're giving it to tenants, because what a lot of our clients will see is that they give out things like parking fobs and things like that quite often, which are actually quite expensive to replace and have a lot of value. And you can give out sets of keys and the keys will come back, but the parking fob was mysteriously disappeared and things like that. To actually be able to say at the point at which you bring that key back in, okay, this is what should have been on that set of keys, for example, and double check that at the point the person's returning it, that enables you to capture all of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, car parking fobs are becoming more the norm, especially the new builds. They tend to have their own parking and underground parking. So yeah, that's going to make a huge difference. Also, the fact is that just the amount of keys, like I said, the number, and sometimes we get huge bunches of keys. I mean, to be honest with you, it takes me back to when I was in the prison service and all the keys I used to have there. I mean, we had bunches of keys there, and I just look at these and think, oh my God, I don't want to be responsible for all these. Half of them I don't even know if they would work. And it doesn't help also then when you get asked, or could you check every single key against every single lock and let me know which one does what? And it's like, oh my God. To have a way of managing that, certainly from both the client point of view, but from our point of view, and have that seamless, to me is a no-brainer. It makes really good sense, which then goes back to the original question. Why is it that you just see the written manual that's stuffed in a drawer somewhere that someone's got to find, and it's been so well thumbed how they can even read it, or it's been rubbed out so many times, and the confusion with the numbers of the keys because you can't put the address on, it's just, there's a lot of stuff there that could be really simplified, and I just don't understand why it isn't more widely adopted. I mean, is it a CRM issue? Is it an integration issue?
I think it's actually, I mean, maybe we could argue that the likes of us, and we're not the only people sort of out there doing that, but the likes of us maybe aren't doing a good enough job as well of letting people know that there is another way. And so I think it's really important for everybody, when you see these problems come about, to actually be able to raise the issue and let people know actually that there are ways this problem can be solved. You're not reliant on technology from the Stone Age or at least the early age of writing to manage these things. And there are ways that you can do it and that can be very effective. I'm certainly aware that a lot of the people we work with often say things like, gosh, this has actually solved a problem we didn't know we had. So it goes beyond just the actual physical keeping track of keys or that who's got the key kind of issue, but we've seen people use it to, for example, make sure that when a cleaner visits a property that the key went out at a certain time and it came back at a certain time, and the key was only out for 2 hours and yet the cleaner billed for 4 hours. And you get some really interesting sorts of side effects and things as well, just by having that data available and easily accessible. It kind of opens up sort of all sorts of other things as well that maybe people don't think about straight away.
And also, I suppose, in case you lose them as well, because it does happen, especially if you've got multiple contractors, and it could be the contractor's got them, they think they've given them back or whatever, but they're still in their possession. But we all lose keys, it's like socks, you will do it at one point or another, but invariably they turn up. But obviously with keys, they're much more important. They need to be secured, and equally you need to be able to track and trace them to make sure that they come back so everyone else can do their job. So I suppose being able to then identify exactly where those keys are, not just maybe the contract, maybe the actual locality. Can Keyzapp do that? Do your tags do that?
So as in the actual physical location of the key. We don't take it that far, and I'm not really aware that as yet the tech has quite got there yet. It's not quite practical enough to do that.
From a geotag point of view, you mean?
Yeah, to actually geotag the key. I mean, there are some very cool things out there which you might see. I don't know, some of your listeners might have heard of things like Tile, which is a sort of personal device that you can attach to your own keys. And that's quite clever because it works with your mobile phone. So it uses your mobile phone's GPS to sort of keep a record of where that key is. So it connects to the mobile, and then the mobile says where you are. I don't know if they've released it yet. I know that Apple has got a big kind of thing that they're about to release.
AirTags, yeah. That's going to be working a very similar way, but because I think iPhone have almost about 40% of the UK market, it's going to be a lot better than just downloading an app.
I think I contribute to at least 10% of that Apple. I'm terrible. I'm an apple tart, basically, literally, and not the edible kind either. It's a case of, if it's Apple, I got to have it.
You want it,
including the next Apple iPhone. But then again, I use it for work, and it means our report pictures are really, really good within the InventoryBase app and report. But I heard about Apple, and I think the keys for the geotag, is it an RFID or
RFID tag, yeah. It's an ultra wide Bluetooth chip.
Again, funnily enough, it's actually the same tech that the COVID app uses to do this track and trace that it's doing now. So when you get within range of someone who's reported symptoms, it's actually that same kind of radio, the Bluetooth radio inside the phones, that's used for that. There are, you can kind of see that it's kind of coming along, particularly in the sort of personal space. But if you actually then map that onto those of us who are actually managing very large numbers of keys, it kind of adds some other challenges as well. So the big one is cost. These tags are not going to be that cheap. They're probably fine for like one set of keys. I don't know what they're going to be. I think a tile is somewhere between £15 and £25 for a single tile, for example. And I imagine the Apple one won't be cheaper than that, knowing Apple.
I don't think they're looking at it from that kind of scale, are they? They're looking at your users, where you're looking at it from a much bigger scale. You're looking at it from a landlord, estate, letting agent, from a facilities management point of view, especially as we said earlier on about the build to rent market, because that must create a huge amount of keys.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. So all of these things where you've got loads and loads of keys, the problems start to increase. And the other thing is that all of this stuff needs energy to work. So you've actually then got batteries to manage inside a tag too. So some of them will last about a year, but let's say if you're even managing a modest number of keys, say 100, if you've got to keep track of 100 batteries over a year, suddenly you're creating just as many problems as you had with keys in the first place. And these are all problems I expect will be solved. But, at the moment, we're still kind of working towards it.
But it does show, though, that it is working towards, that there is we know what the solution kind of like is. It's just, like I said, the tech being able to keep up with it and get us there. But I think certainly from a key management point of view, from my point of view as an inventory provider, to be able to log out keys automatically, to be able to log them back into automatically, so I can prove that I've given them back, and I can prove that I haven't lost any because they're all on a tag system where, like you said, it's locked. Certainly, as a contractor, that will make life a lot easier. And certainly, I said, if we could then include that within the report, either through a link, a geotag or something to showcase that within the report, especially when we're giving it over to tenants, that just makes huge amount of sense. It's, in some respects, it's quite a simple thing to do, but obviously I know with the tech it's got to be there. But equally, I would imagine then that will make life better for CRMs, because I know there's CRMs all over the place. Everybody's integrating with everybody else. We're doing it with InventoryBase ourselves, but it still seems as a bit of a barrier, or you're actually seeing that barrier come down from your point of view.
Yeah, on the CRM side, I think the barrier is definitely coming down. We started Keyzapp getting on for 6 years ago now, and I can see a marked change in that time as to how open the different CRM companies are to actually starting to work with other sort of smaller sort of niche products like ourselves to enhance what that CRM is capable of doing by itself. So I think there's definitely a much more willingness now in the CRM world to work together. Some of the ones out there, this idea of, in the tech world, we would call an API, but that's basically a language that different apps can use to talk to each other. Many more of them are exposing sort of ability now to work with other applications.
Like an open API, which is what InventoryBase have got as an open API. So the actual code and the information and how to integrate is actually there available. It's just a case of then doing it and then working out the little nuances, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm sure you'll know from the InventoryBase side of things that having the ability to do it is one thing, but then there's actually quite a lot that people need to still remember has to go on behind the scenes to really make it work very well. And I think there's a danger sometimes if you put in an integration that only half works, you actually end up with something that's hinders rather than helps the client. One of the things we see is actually means of getting tools to talk to each other is one thing. The next thing is basically making it so that you can kind of synchronize the data properly. And there's actually incredible amount of hard work usually that both companies need to do to make that happen. Yeah, you get all the normal challenges then as to, people have to make resources available. It costs money, it costs time to make it happen. It's getting better and better, certainly from our standpoint, and I know from yours as well. It's really the case, the more people you can integrate with, the better the experience for everybody, so long as you do it right.
It does need to go that way, though, doesn't it? Like the closed API network, it should be a dead idea. I know that there's still some big players that still operate on that way, but they should be thinking about value to the end user. And instead they go, now how much money can I get from other suppliers first? And quite often some of these costs can be higher than what you charge your client base. And so you go, well, it just doesn't make sense. How can we actually work in that way? And that's when these companies that do have open APIs really start to shine and go, we're actually thinking about the end user, not just ourselves.
Yeah, it was certainly the case for us that we talked to a couple of CRM providers. The amount that they've sort of wanted to charge for doing the link has actually been more than the cost of our product to our customer, for example. And so sometimes that doesn't make sense. But as I said, I'm pleased to see that it's less and less of that these days.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, certainly, from our point of view, we're integrating more and more, especially like with the bigger platforms like Repit. The willingness is there. And I think, like you quite rightly pointed out, is the fact that there's a huge benefit, and that, yes, you could charge loads of money, but it's not going to really help. It's going to hinder. And like you said, having that closed API feel is not going to help you going forward. People want that collaborative kind of working approach and want to see people making it for the benefit of the end user rather than about making profit for that particular company.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely getting there on that. As I say, the new challenge is, particularly for a small business like ourselves, is actually just, managing to set aside the time at the same time as the other company. The actual coordination of it sometimes is often the challenge as well to make it happen. But the great thing is now the willingness is there. So that's good.
Manpower to build these things, because they're not easy. Even though they sometimes all look the same, each one has its set of challenges, I mean,
I didn't really appreciate that until I started working with InventoryBase, and I can see what they do, how they do it, how they need to talk to, what kind of work it involves. And don't get me wrong, I am not that au fait with it. I understand it, I get the premise for it, but if you start showing me code and all the bits and pieces they need to do, I just can't gloss over. It's definitely beyond me. This is why they do, they're so good at it, and you saw you guys are as well as. But I mean, I think one of the key things, certainly from an agent point of view, or a landlord or a surveyor point of view, is that evidence, that audit trail. And it's something, certainly from an InventoryBase point of view, certainly me as a user and a provider of services, that to me is absolutely the key to our service. The detailed report, but also then, you know, having an audit trail to see where everything is, what's been done, when, how, who's commented, who, you know, who's interacted with it. And I think you can only do that with tech. You can't do that in a school book or a bit of on a folder with a list of key numbers and addresses. That's just not going to work. It's too much information that you need to be capturing quite quickly. And the only way you could realistically do that is tech, and also then share that information if it's needed.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, probably one of the big things about technology is, compared to a book, is that the book is rooted to one place. So it's usually either next to the key cabinet or somewhere out the front of somebody's office. But actually the interaction with, in our case, keys, but it could be anything really in tech, you know, the interactions are happening so much more out and about. Sometimes it's just physically impossible to update the key book and things like that. If you, for example, hand the key over to a tenant outside of the office, there's no easy way that you can track that at the moment. So that's where the tech comes in. If you've got the ability to just touch a key to your mobile phone or log it out that way, you know, it's going to be, you can track much more and you can get much better adherence to your key policy.
Given the current situation of COVID, the amount of people that I've spoken to, offices have become almost like glorified key cabinets.
Yeah.
And me as an agent could be getting in touch with you, Sián, saying, look, I need this doing, but I'm actually working from home. I need you to pick up those keys. I can't actually see if those keys are in the office or being handed out to somebody in the first place. If it's a key book, where do I get that data from? And then that's when you get your issues of turning up to the office and then someone going, I don't know where they are. Can you hang about for an hour or so until I find out and actually get them back? And you go, oh, no, I can't, because I've got another job to go to.
Exactly. It's that knock-on effect, and that's something we're experiencing all the time. A lot of agents, you know, really on the ball and they really try, but at the end of the day, there's certain things that are out of control. If another job the EICR needs, especially now, because obviously legislation is all properties have to have the EICR. So of course, and they're taking precedence over the rest of us, because unless that's done, they can't rent that property out. That, you know, that can't go to the tenant. So quite rightly, they've got to put them first, but then the knock-on effect, if they've then got to go multiple properties and they haven't got the time to come back, then we're, like you said, we're sat there waiting. And quite often we will find ourselves outside of an agent's for an hour or so, or having to go grab a cup of tea, go and get some lunch, because we can't do the job until we get those keys. It's a real difficult issue. So I don't know is necessarily what the answer is. I suppose realistically it's about informing, letting them know what the tech is out there, what the tech can do, and also how they can interact with it quickly and cleanly via the CRMs, and also just showing the benefits of it, because it doesn't impact them from my time point of view if I'm losing time, but it impacts them if they don't get their report on time. And obviously then what those issues then create either up the chain or down the chain, especially the end user, the tenant who stood there waiting to get in and they can't because either we haven't finished or the key's not been given back, so we can't even get in. It can create a lot of issues that could realistically be solved quite easily if that tech, that understanding, those processes were adopted.
Yeah, and another thing that sort of related to that, that's probably easier solved by tech, is the idea of actually reserving a key up front. So knowing that you're going to be needing it at a certain time and actually be able to flag that. Again, with pen and paper, that's, I mean, you can do it, but you've got to have a really strong process that makes it work, and it's very cumbersome and you'll get it wrong. Whereas actually, again, if I can just put a little note, say, or a little reservation on a key that says this key is needed by Sián at 11 o'clock tomorrow, then anybody trying to give that key out prior knows it's got to be back before Sián needs it. And again, it's those sorts of things which tech just speeds up and makes so much easier, so much more possible than it has been.
Yeah, because otherwise you're relying on everybody's memory. And like you said, because everybody's now working remotely, you might have the odd one or two people in the actual branch or the office, but most are working at home. And depending on where they're located, it will depend on who knows what, when. And we had it the other day where someone had the keys and the staff member didn't realise that we needed them and they took them home. And of course, then we had to drag them from home to the office to give us the keys so we could do our job. So the impact on that from a timeline point of view, from the time pressure and the report pressure was quite big. And also the fact is, certainly from a clerk point of view, the way the industry works, we get paid per job. So therefore, we're not paid for our time, for our travel. So of course, if that's impacted, that impacts on our jobs going forward. And also, so we're losing that time, that ability to maybe do other jobs that would be income generating, and we've lost out basically because of that one issue. I'm not saying it's the agent's fault, because these things do happen, and if you don't know, and like you said, if you haven't got that robust writing audit system within the office, that agent wouldn't necessarily know that those keys were needed. So of course, take them home because home's nearer, makes sense. You can be in office the next day, but it's the impact that it has. Again, to me, it makes sense to look at these and think, well, how could I address these pain points? And to me, online key management with those geotags, with those QR codes, with that management system, just makes so much sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I think is interesting as well, if you look across different industries, like you said, in your industry, you are paid by job. And so it might not be immediately obvious to an agent the actual costs that are going on with keys not being in the right place and things like that. We do see sort of more in the commercial world, sometimes there's much more call out charges and things that are getting applied. And so people sometimes see that more in those parts of the industry than they do more in the residential sector. However, there is also that element that if I'm running a business and my staff are running around looking for keys, sometimes that's not obvious to me either. And I think that's certainly one of the things that comes out very often to us, is that actually people don't realize how much time they waste as they sort of have to interrupt numerous people to work out where a key is, or get on the phone, or have somebody come in to bring a key back, that sort of thing. It's all time that people really should be spending moving the business forward, not chasing around after keys and things like that. So often our job is to help people understand some of the impacts that they are seeing day to day, and it does add up. It's usually hundreds of pounds a month if you kind of add up the lost time, and
possibly even more than that when you consider the domino effect of lost opportunity, not just to the agent, to the clerk, to that tenant that's moving into that business that they work for. You just go, the hours soon really rack up. Really, yeah, but it is hard to quantify, because quite often you might think, oh, it's just 5 minutes. But if you were to time it, you're probably looking, whenever there's a key missing, it's like 20 minutes, half an hour. And it's not just one person, it's a few people. And then when it turns out that key is lost, it's, oh, now we need to plan to go get that key cut. And it's not quite often, it's not a junior person, it's the lettings manager who's higher paid anyway, do you know? And you just go, surely there must be something better to do than this. So yeah, that lost opportunity. Accountability, I think, is the big thing, and responsibility of it all. People don't like to feel accountable for it. Quite often when a set of keys gets handed out by an agent, it's not often their responsibility for them to manage that back in. Instead, it'll just become the company's.
Yeah.
And that's when you can go to your key book and go, I can't even read whoever's written in this in the first place, when really that's when you need those standardized processes.
Yeah, exactly. And what I also find is that you always seem to get one person that is accountable for that book to know where the keys are. If they're not available, then everyone's scratching their heads, everyone's trying to figure out what the other person means, or what they written down and how and where everything is. And then you stood there as a clerk in the agent's office going, this is not going to go well, because no one seems to know. Everyone's kind of like looking at us as disabled. Do you know? And I'm thinking, it's not my big company, it's not my book, I have no idea. Whereas if it was online, if it was tracked and traced and everything, then you'd have the ability to have a look, at least see who maybe had it last, so you could then work your way back. And like I said, again, that whole track and trace kind of element of it, so that hopefully you won't be losing loads of hours and time on it. Because it'd be really interesting if you could do a study or some sort of bit of a timeline, a day in the life of a set of keys kind of thing, and map out everybody that would have had it, and how long for, and what that kind of like issue would be in regards to that time management and loss of income, etc., etc.
Absolutely. I think, and so one of those things that you certainly can do with the technology that is so much harder to do with kind of written records, or even with spreadsheets, or, a lot of CRMs maybe have some basic functionality around this, but they don't necessarily give you the information that you really want around that sort of thing. One of the things the technology allows is you can click on a property and you can see exactly when keys go out, when they come back, how long they're out for. All of that information suddenly is available to you, which, as I say, you didn't really have before, or if you can get it, it's so much work that it's not worth trying to find it, whereas now it's all available to you. One of the things you touched on a moment ago, Sián, was around this sort of accountability piece as well. I think probably one of the big things we see, and this doesn't just apply to keys, it applies to all processes, probably in all businesses, but the easier you can make them, easier it is to make sure people actually follow the process, and particularly that they follow it consistently. Yeah. So the example you just gave, where somebody who normally looks after the process is away and no one else knows what's going on, if you can make it so simple to see what's going on, then that just suddenly everybody can take some ownership of it. And the flip side is also true. Nobody wants the job of looking after keys, because they know it's such a pain. There's so much kind of reconciliation and chasing around that needs doing. But if you can look in 30 seconds every single day and say, are all my keys back? Suddenly that becomes a thing that is easy to manage. And as soon as it's easy to manage, you can manage it, and things, they improve tenfold, 100-fold potentially in some cases.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even this morning before we started this conversation, as everyone knows, or if people don't know, I work with InventoryBase as head of training, but I also run my own inventory company. And I've already had 3 calls this morning about where are keys, where are they, who's got them, or can I have them? So I'm constantly having to spend a lot of admin time chasing them. Can I get them the day before? What time they're going to be available? Who's going to have them? Or arranging with other contractors to meet them somewhere to get keys. I did it about a month or so ago, where I had to drive 12 miles in one way, the contractor 12 miles the other way, so we could meet in the middle on the motorway to swap keys, because they'd taken them to another job and I needed them. The agent didn't tell them that I needed them, so they've gone to another job, which is 12 miles away from where I was. And the worst thing was that I'd actually passed their area and then gone 12 miles ahead, and then had to come back 12 miles to go back another 12 miles to be able to go and do the job, all of which time-wise, fuel cost-wise, I don't get reimbursed. It's part and parcel of the way our particular the industry works. So, I've lost out. I've lost out on the time, I've lost out on the fuel side of things. The contractor had to muck around, she didn't know. And to be fair to the agent, it was one of those situations where they didn't realise they hadn't brought them back. But if they'd been able to see on the system that the keys were still out, we could have avoided that, or at least got it to a stage where we didn't have to be doing this toing and throwing it, which is
or if maybe that person had been chased when the keys were due back or something like that, they would have known they needed to get them back in, or
even like an alert, like you said, something that flags up to say you need these keys. Because again, we spend a lot of time chasing keys ourselves to make sure that they're going to be there, especially when it comes to checkouts. Have the tenants given them back? So of course, if they're tagged in, if they're QR coded in, they're in the system, no, it will be given that instant, no, we haven't got them back, or rather than going to the key safe, and you can almost hear the key safe opening, loads of keys jangling around. They go, which one is it? Where is it? Have they put it back on the right tag? Is it on the right number? Is these are the right sets? And you can only memorize so many keys. I mean, in a way, I actually think agents are brilliant, because sometimes they'll look at keys and they know exactly what those keys are for, who they're for, whether they're brand new, who gave them, etc., etc. That's a wealth of knowledge. But the trouble is, as soon as they're not there, that knowledge is gone. No longer accessible.
Bit of an aside, I met a really clever agent who is visually impaired, and he knows his keys by feel. He can actually physically know which sets of keys he has based on what the key set feels like, and he helps that by, a lot of times people will he'll put like a fluffy tag on one, or things like that to actually do it. But so some people do have incredible memories, and that's brilliant, but it only works for that one person usually. And the more people you start introducing into a process, the harder it then is to keep track. I mean, I think probably for us property managers, inventory clerks, they're a good example of people who really do have the attention to detail. They're interested in those sorts of things. They understand and work to process a lot. That's not the case for every type of tradesman out there, for example. Dare I say it, not even for sales negotiators and people like that, whose main interest is in getting out there and getting the deal done. And one of the challenges with key management in general is the sheer number of different types of people that need to interact with keys and interact with that process. And so it all comes back again that if you can make it really easy, you've actually got a fighting chance of knowing what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that's the basis of all of this, isn't it? Is knowing where they are, understanding what happens with the keys, who needs what, and just making that whole process simple. And one question I was going to ask you from Keyzapp point of view, do you take pictures of the keys, or you just tag the keys, or can you do both? How does that actually work?
That's a really interesting issue, actually, because it's the number one thing that people ask for within Keyzapp, to have pictures, and it's something we are working on at the moment. I know some inventory software, almost every type of inventory software, will take pictures now.
Yeah, we do.
On the key side, we are being particularly careful around that, and the reason for it is, if you imagine that the weakest point of probably every tech system, so you might argue that this maybe is one of the downsides of tech, is that particularly if it's up in the cloud, as most are today, they can be compromised by somebody, for example, forgetting a username and password or something like that, or using a password that's been compromised somewhere else. Almost everybody will admit that they've used the same password in multiple places. things like that. So if a system such as ours could be compromised, and I'd argue probably the same does apply to the inventory software too, that if those keys, if there's a good photograph of keys in that system and somebody could break in from the outside, suddenly the risk is going up a bit, because it is possible these days to cut keys from photographs. And so if I've got access to a photograph of the key, I can suddenly break into a property without actually first breaking into the agent to steal the key. So it's something we've been particularly careful about, and we are working on it. Basically, we want all the right levels of encryptions, the right access mechanisms, so that we can really tightly control who has access to those photographs when we have them.
No, that's a very good point, actually. Yes.
Yeah, I'd say also it's not something you see everywhere in the industry. So it's something probably people should be careful of when they're shopping for technology, is that a lot of the time you'll see something that looks great, but has that company really thought about some of these things that could happen further down the line? And it's always worth testing that when you're shopping for any kind of new product, to see how deep does it go, what are the real risks, and can they give you a satisfactory answer?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a very, very good point. And funny enough, it's something that back in my previous life, that was a big issue about cutting of keys and how good some people are. You could argue, well, it's only a house, it's only a home. But then if you're going into that, certainly into the higher market bracket, you 1 million and above kind of properties, that could be even a bigger issue. But yeah, it's a very, very good and valid point. But I think it, certainly from an inventory clerk point of view, you use those pictures to be able to identify those keys, because we've got no other mechanism.
Of course. Yeah, no, and again, it's also a matter of risk, isn't it? Some people are happy to, if you understand the risks, and let's face it, it's a very small risk, but it's one that because we focus specifically on keys, it's one that we really feel, for example, that we need to get absolutely right and be as secure as it's absolutely humanly possible to be, which is why maybe we've been a bit slower to do it than we would honestly like to be. And again, just being really honest here, that's
as it stands, there is a full capacity for as much detail as you want as a description though. So what sort of keys are on there? 1 Yale, 2 Chubb, maybe it's a Banham lock. If you want to go with key codes or barrel lock numbers, you can as well, because Banham keys or any sort of like master suited system, very expensive to replace the locks if those keys suddenly get lost and there's none spare. And so it's always
security keys, don't you? So very specific. I mean, I know one particular client where there's a key that will do everything. So that's very specialized. So equally, we're extremely careful with it, and we worry about it a lot just to make sure that it remains safe and secure all the time. So
there's a university that we're working with who actually has a fine for people who take master keys, so keys that'll open multiple doors, of £100,000 if that key is lost, because of the net impact of everything that would have to be replaced if that key disappeared. So I mean, we don't see that quite so often in the residential sector, but certainly something that needs a lot of thought.
Yeah, it does, especially like you said, when you're dealing with maybe block management, so that keeping all of those properties in there, especially with, I suppose, maybe also the student market as well. That must be because of the amount of students you've got, properties, and also the turnover as well, because they don't necessarily have a lot of void periods, but their turnover, especially if they're only students are only there for maybe one kind of like cycle at university or at the college or wherever it is that they are. So therefore you've got multiple keys going in and out constantly. I mean, that must be a huge
same goes for the HMO and Airbnb market. Keys constantly being handled, turnover, and if one, because obviously they're usually in blocks, if one does go missing, as Tim says, it's the rest of the block that needs doing. Housing associations very similar, aren't they?
Yeah, because I mean, I work with a particular housing association, and they've got a very large portfolio, and the key management of that alone, especially now with COVID, where you're not having either the check-in and sometimes the check-out face-to-face, so therefore the key handover has to be done very carefully, or if not by a safe, and everything that involves that side of things. So therefore, those tracking of those keys becomes even more difficult. And obviously you're doing or dealing with maybe larger volumes than maybe you would normally do. So then you've got that whole issue as well. So I think COVID has actually created another issue with keys regarding the fact that we're not doing face-to-face contact now.
It certainly has. It certainly has. I think Philip touched on it earlier on as well. What we're definitely seeing is much more dispersed key management going on. So instead of everything really being managed from like a central office location, now suddenly it's making sense for more people to take more keys away with them. And once again, as soon as you've lost the access to your central book, suddenly that stops working again. And so definitely a definite trend with COVID is keys now being managed more and more outside of the office environment. I mean, even seeing, I don't know if you're seeing this, Sián, and any of the agents you work with, I'm even seeing people starting to maybe even decentralize the way they work. So there was quite a trend towards kind of bringing particularly property management into like a single hub location. And if you've got lots of branches and lots of offices, all your management's being done from one place, and the others are just effectively doing the sort of sales and the one-to-one interaction with clients. What I'm seeing more and more people look at doing now is actually moving some of those central functions back out again to the edges, again because of the practicality. They don't have so many people in the central office anymore. They need those keys, or they need those people to be operating much more locally than had been the case previously. And I think that's a really interesting trend that COVID is sort of forcing on us. And again, it means that some of the ways we used to do things just don't work anymore. And if we still want to know what's going on, you at home might be very useful for you to know where a certain key is before you go to get it, because you might not be going to the office anymore. You might be going to meet somebody else or something like that.
Exactly. No, that's a really good point. And it's something we were already, and certainly we're experiencing, certainly the initial lockdown, where no process were really geared up for what had to happen. And like you said, everybody was then sent home, working from home. And obviously a lot of people were furloughed. So therefore your access to staff, access to the agents was even more restricted, because of the fact there was no one to actually open the office door and give you that access. And if they weren't the right people who didn't know what the keys were doing, etc., then you were having to rely on them finding out from someone else. There was a lot of disconnect going on in regards to the whole key management side of things. I mean, and that obviously, because of what was happening with lockdown, we knew it was kind of like coming, but not to the degree that it came, and none of us prepared because we didn't expect it. I mean, if we had this conversation last year, you'd be going to me, pandemic, really? What are you on about? That's stupid. No, absolutely not. And yet here we are, but here we also are going into tier 2, tier 3, potentially mass lockdown again because of what the situation is. It's likely that we're going to get even more of this going forward. So it says to me, we need to get this situation sorted. We need agents to decide on what is the best method to not just help them, but also help everybody in that particular tenancy, that timeline, and again across the actual supply network, because anything that involves property will involve keys of some sort at some point. It's a simple fact. From your point of view as Keyzapp, what do you want to see happening in the industry? What do you want to see these agents, these users and holders of keys doing?
I think probably the first thing I'd say is that actually people making sure they're actually signing keys back in and out to everybody. I know that sounds a bit strange, and you might even be thinking, well, surely everybody's doing that already. But funnily enough, I don't see that happen all that often. I think if you're a contractor, almost always you're going to have a key kind of booked out to you, something like that. But actually what people often do is they don't have the same standards of their staff, for example, that they have of their contractors. Sometimes for good reasons. A lot of things I hear is, oh, we trust our staff, it's not really a problem. But it's not really about trust. It's actually about, I think you mentioned earlier on, Sián, like mistakes happen, and they happen all the time. And unless you're able to kind of keep track of things from end to end all the way, you're not actually able to have any kind of process that you can really trust, because you don't know whether it was the contractor not bringing the key back, or whether it was actually just one of your staff's still got it in their pocket or something like that. And it's not about trust, it's just that somebody's forgotten to do something, or they've made a quick error. And the ability to enforce those processes kind of right across the board, so the whole range of people that interact, really then means that you know what's going on. Again, I think in regard to COVID and things like that, again, it's making sure that you're able to think about the big picture, I suppose, and recognize that the way you used to do things isn't the way that is going to make sense these days.
Yeah, we've changed a lot, and we're having to change, and I think that is going to continue. I don't think where we were in March to where we are now is going to be exactly the same where we're going to be next March. I think things are continuously evolving, but one thing that is good, that people are thinking more, and they are innovating, they are looking at these issues and looking to try and address them, and trying to actually make a difference, and have in a way sometimes the time to actually do it, because normally we're rushing around just trying to do the day-to-day stuff, just on that constant treadmill, trying to get things done, just trying to keep things working. Whereas in a way, lockdowns forced us to have that time, to have that thinking time and an ability to do something. But then it's a case of what you do. Who do you go to? Who do you see? How do you get situations, these pain points sorted and working for everybody's best interest?
Exactly. Yeah.
As Tim kind of touched on, it's that human element, isn't it, that we need to keep to a minimum really. And that's where tech really starts to shine and capture that data, because, well, we've been in it for a while, but people are really starting to get on board with data is almost becoming king to some degree of, I need to see everything that happens. And with that, I think there will become legislation and regulation. I know that in Scotland you've got the lettings code, which means you need to have a record of every key. That will follow down into this country, and I feel like there's going to be more ISO standards that you see in like the security world of seals and tags that need to be attached to these or electronically recorded, because keys unlock doors to families' homes, and people are incredibly important. They need to be kept safe and secure, and it's too easily compromised sometimes with some of these archaic processes. So I think it is going to be going that way.
I think that's a very good point, especially now that I've got this working group for the logbook for properties, where you're going to be having all the information for property, either sales or lettings, and that's going to include every component. It's going to include obviously the safety element in regards to certificates, gas safety, EICRs, etc., right the way through the process. And keys have got to be part and parcel of that conversation. The same as that you have a logbook for a car, you have a set of keys, it's included, so it's no different. I can see that certainly becoming part of that particular conversation, or at least if it isn't, it should be. So that will be very interesting, and how that will manifest itself going forward, especially as they've got a timeline for next year for introducing this.
Sure. Not everybody knows this, but actually some of these regulations around keys are actually already there. So if you're, for example, a member of Arla Property Mark, for example, then the Arla Code of Practice there does actually say, that you need to make sure and log keys in and out, and it doesn't discriminate between staff and contractors or those sorts of things. Property Ombudsman, exactly the same. So even in England, we're kind of seeing that's already there in a lot of the codes. And I think there's one thing that we can all be sure of, is that the legislation in this industry is not going to get less. There is more and more, and the more technology enables, the more you're going to start to be required to do more things, particularly in terms of auditing kind of what's going on and keeping people safe. It's interesting, we haven't talked that much about security yet, actually, have we?
No.
It's a big topic we've maybe not got to.
but security is everything, isn't it? For security of both the keys, the asset, and also the staff themselves. So that's a huge conversation. Maybe that's something we could have another podcast about to really get into depth, because there's a lot to be talked about, a lot to be discussed.
There is, yeah.
Excellent. So Tim, Phil, great to have you on our podcast. That has been so informative. I didn't really understand, certainly about the legislation side of things, certainly from like what Scotland are doing in regards to keys. So that will certainly be of interest to a lot of members in regards to people who use InventoryBase, and also the wider industry, as to how that looks and whether that's going to be coming forward through, certainly on the logbook side of things. So that's been amazing. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for your time, for your information, for your understanding of the industry. From a point of view of our podcasters, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Probably the best thing to do is look us up on our website. So that's keyzapp.com, spelled Keyzapp. I'm sure you'll put it in your notes and things as well. Keyzapp.com. We've got some forms on there if you want to get in touch. We're always open, actually, to talking to people in the industry. It's great to understand different people's needs, how keys affect you. It really helps us make sure we're doing the right thing for people. Philip is probably better than I am in terms of getting out there on the social media as well. We're both on LinkedIn, I think, aren't we, Phil? Is there anything additional you wanted to say?
Not really. We're just always here, and if it's just some advice, really, I'm always at hand and ready to help.
Yeah, so we're always talking on LinkedIn, aren't we, Phil? So I mean, it's a great platform to, for businesses, for agents, landlords, to get in touch, find out who you guys are, what you're doing, and are able to help. And I think certainly from both our points of views, is the fact is that it's sometimes, even if you don't necessarily give over the solution, or someone buys the solution or whatever, having that chat, having that understanding, and then going back and looking at what your working practices are and how they could be better handled and better for, not just for yourself as the agent, as the landlord, but also for the wider market, for the wider supply market, makes a huge amount of sense. And then we can hopefully take that main pain point away from keys, because the solutions are there. You have a solution, so it's not a difficult solution to really implement. I think it's just a case of just understanding it and actually thinking, no, I need to do something about this, and then just getting on with it. But it's certainly available, and I think with more integrations as they come along, it will make that process a lot easier and less painful for the agent, for the individual to implement. Exciting times. certainly exciting.
Yeah, definitely. What I would say is, I know that inventory clerks, you guys probably aren't the guys that are always going to be sort of investing in a solution like ours. However, we see a lot of value in you understanding what's possible. So if you do want to just give us a call, have a chat, or you want to see a little bit more, we're always happy to show you, because you guys are the guys that are in the right place at the right time when some of these issues occur. And as I said at the beginning, sometimes people just need to know that there is a better way out there. Yeah, we can all help each other.
That sounds good. And I'm definitely up for the helping each other. I think the more support we can offer each other in the industry, it doesn't have to be us and them or competitors or anything like that. And I think certainly with this whole pandemic situation, I think we're all talking much more, we're all working together much more. And I think it's something that, we're all going to benefit from. And I would not like to see that like wane away once things maybe get back to some normality, because I think it's been really, really good. The fact is, we've got competitors, but equally we have friends in the industry, and if we can all work together, there's a common aim, there's a common good there to be had. And I think that will be for the benefit of everybody, which is nice. I think we certainly need that. Phil, Tim, thank you so much indeed for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you very much indeed for your patience and for agreeing to come on, and I look forward to talking to you both again about the security aspect. I think we definitely need to do that.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Thanks
Sián.
for having us.
Brilliant.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody listening today. We will put information and also links on the show notes so you can get in touch with Phil and Tim and ask your questions. And we look forward to seeing you all again in our next podcasts. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Inventory Professional Podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe to our podcast now and share the love. This podcast was brought to you by InventoryBase, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports.